The muddy waters of the Colorado River churned beneath Ethan Mitchell's weathered boots as he gazed across the bustling docks of Yuma. 10 years of running from his past had led him here, to this sun-scorched trading post where riverboats carried both legitimate cargo and darker secrets upstream from the Gulf of California. His calloused hands, once used for violence, now gripped a simple farmer's hoe as he contemplated the new life he'd carved out along the fertile riverbank. The summer of 1873 had brought unprecedented rains, transforming the normally arid landscape into a maze of verdant cotton fields and burgeoning corn crops. Ethan's small farm, earned through 3 years of honest labor, sat nestled against a bend in the river where the rich soil yielded harvests that helped him slowly build a reputation as something other than the notorious bank robber he'd once been. Few in Yuma knew of his past with the infamous Turner Gang, and he intended to keep it that way. Benjamin Roberts, the aging riverboat captain who'd given Ethan his first honest work unloading cargo, waved from the helm of his vessel as it docked. The old man's weather-beaten face crinkled with a knowing smile. He was one of the few who knew Ethan's true identity, having recognized him from wanted posters years ago. Instead of turning him in, Benjamin had seen something redeemable in the young outlaw's eyes and offered him a chance at a new life. The peaceful routine Ethan had established was shattered one sweltering afternoon when he heard desperate shouts coming from the dense thicket bordering his cotton fields. Following the commotion, he discovered a young Comanche boy, no more than 12, backing away from a massive grizzly bear. The child's leg was bleeding, and terror filled his dark eyes as the beast advanced. Without hesitation, Ethan grabbed the pitchfork he'd been using and placed himself between predator and prey. What followed was a desperate dance of survival as Ethan faced down the enraged bear. His years of combat experience surfaced instinctively as he dodged powerful swipes from razor-sharp claws, looking for an opening. The bear's hot breath reeked of carrion as it lunged, nearly catching Ethan's shoulder. With a swift movement born from countless bar fights, he drove the pitchfork deep into the animal's chest, ending the threat but carrying away several deep gashes across his ribs for his trouble. The boy, who introduced himself as Little Hawk in broken English, turned out to be the son of Chief Running River, leader of a nearby Comanche band that maintained an uneasy peace with Yuma's residents. When the chief arrived with his warriors the following day, Ethan expected hostility. Instead, he found himself honored as a brother of the tribe, presented with a mysterious deerskin map marked with symbols he couldn't decipher. Helen Turner's arrival at the Yuma trading post complicated matters further. The sister of his former gang leader, she recognized Ethan immediately despite his sun-darkened skin and full beard. Her presence threatened everything he'd built, but the way she carried herself, tired, desperate, seeking something beyond revenge, suggested she might be running from her own demons. The question was whether she'd keep his secret or use it as leverage. As Ethan studied the Comanche map by lamplight that evening, Helen appeared at his door. "Alexander Turner's coming," she said, without preamble, referring to her infamous brother. "He's heard rumors of Comanche gold and he thinks you found it." The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. He'd spent years trying to escape his past life of pursuing riches, only to have a treasure map literally handed to him. But this time, something felt different. The map wasn't just a path to gold. It was a sacred trust, a symbol of redemption. The growing tensions in Yuma manifested in subtle ways. Noah Phillips, the local merchant who'd always treated Ethan with suspicion, began asking pointed questions about his relationship with the Comanche. Clara Perez, whose father ran the riverboat supply depot, started paying special attention to Helen's movements around town. And Benjamin Roberts, ever watchful from his riverboat's deck, noticed mounted figures observing the town from distant ridges. Whether Turner's gang or Comanche scouts, he couldn't tell. Ethan's newfound peace was dissolving like morning mist on the Colorado. The map in his possession seemed to pulse with dangerous potential, drawing old enemies and new allies into an expanding web of conflicting interests. As he watched another sunset paint the river's surface with gold, he realized that true redemption might require more than simply walking away from his past. It might demand confronting it head-on, with the wisdom to understand that some treasures were worth more than gold. The following morning, Ethan rose before dawn and made his way to the riverfront, where the early light cast long shadows across the Colorado's murky waters. He needed to think, to plan his next move carefully. The weight of the sacred map seemed to grow heavier with each passing day, not just physically in his coat pocket, but in the burden of responsibility it represented. The Comanche had trusted him with something precious, and now that trust was drawing dangerous attention. Benjamin Roberts's riverboat, the River Queen, creaked gently against its moorings as Ethan approached. The weathered captain stood at the rail, his keen eyes scanning the distant bluffs where mounted figures had been spotted the previous evening. Without turning, Benjamin spoke, his voice gravelly from years of shouting over churning waters. "Those weren't Comanche up there yesterday, Ethan. Turner's men have a particular way of sitting their horses, slouched, like they're waiting for trouble." Ethan leaned against a wooden piling, considering the implications. Jacob Turner's gang had been quiet these past months, but their reputation for violence and greed was well earned. If they'd caught wind of the map's existence, the relative peace in Yuma could shatter like thin ice under a heavy boot. "How many did you count, Benjamin?" Ethan asked, watching a group of early-rising dock workers unload cargo from a smaller supply boat. "4, maybe 5. They're being careful, keeping their distance, but they're watching." Benjamin turned to face Ethan, his weathered face serious. "You've got something they want, don't you? Something worth killing for?" The question hung in the air like morning mist, heavy with unspoken understanding. Helen appeared on the boardwalk above them, her presence a reminder of what Ethan stood to lose. She carried a basket of fresh bread from the baker's, and the domestic normalcy of the scene made his heart ache. She'd built a life here, trusted him despite his past, and now he was bringing danger to her doorstep. When she caught his eye, her smile faltered slightly, sensing the tension between the two men. "Clara Perez has been asking questions," Helen said as she descended the wooden steps to join them. "About the Comanche, about that day with the bear. She's not the only one." She set the basket down and brushed flour from her apron. "People are nervous, Ethan. They remember the last time Turner's gang came through town. The memory of that bloody day 3 years ago hung between them. Turner's men had tried to rob the riverboat office, killing 2 clerks in the process. It had been one of the events that had pushed Ethan towards seeking redemption, turning away from his own outlaw past. Now that past was threatening to overtake his present like a spring flood, overwhelming its banks. Alexander, the young deputy who'd recently taken the badge in Yuma, appeared at the far end of the dock, his presence both reassuring and concerning. The law in Yuma had always maintained a delicate balance with the river trade, understanding that some questions were better left unasked, but Alexander was young, eager to prove himself, and Ethan couldn't be sure where the deputy's loyalties would lie if Turner's gang forced a confrontation. Frances, the elderly owner of the Riverside Hotel, watched from her second-floor balcony as the morning's drama unfolded below. She'd seen enough in her years on the river to recognize the signs of approaching trouble. Her gnarled hands gripped the railing as she observed the gathered group, her presence a silent reminder that, in river towns like Yuma, everyone's fate was somehow connected, like debris caught in the same current. Ethan finally broke the tense silence. "I need to make a journey upriver," he announced, his decision crystallizing like salt on the riverbank. "There's someone in Prescott who might be able to help us understand what we're dealing with." He didn't mention the map directly, but Benjamin's knowing look suggested the captain had already guessed its significance. Helen's face showed concern, but also determination. "I'm coming with you," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Whatever this is, we face it together." The morning sun caught the silver pendant at her throat, a gift from her late father, reminding Ethan that some treasures couldn't be measured in gold or marked on any map. The river rolled past them, eternal and indifferent to human concerns, its surface reflecting the growing morning light. Somewhere upstream, beyond the twisting bends and treacherous rapids, lay answers, or perhaps more questions. But as Ethan looked at Helen's resolute face and felt the reassuring presence of Benjamin beside him, he knew that whatever path the map led them down, he wouldn't be walking it alone. The murky waters of the Verde River churned beneath Ethan Mitchell's weathered boots as he guided his horse across the shallow ford. The stolen gold weighed heavy in his saddlebags, but the weight on his conscience was heavier still. 2 days had passed since he'd fled the botched bank robbery in Prescott, leaving his fellow outlaws behind. The sacred map from the Comanche chief burned like fire against his chest where he'd hidden it, a constant reminder of the debt he owed for his own salvation. Benjamin Turner waited at the trading post near Globe, his shrewd eyes scanning the dusty horizon. As the most successful merchant along the river route, He'd built his fortune through cunning deals with both settlers and native tribes. The news of the Prescott robbery had reached him swiftly, carried by riders seeking bounty. But Turner held a deeper interest in Ethan Mitchell. He knew the outlaw possessed something far more valuable than mere banknotes. Anna Phillips tended to her father's wound in their modest cabin near the trading post. Jacob Phillips had taken a bullet trying to stop the robbery, but his daughter couldn't shake the memory of the outlaw who'd hesitated, who'd pushed her father out of the line of fire when his companions would have killed the old man. That same outlaw had saved the Comanche chief's son months ago, earning a treasure map that now had every cutthroat and bounty hunter in the territory on his trail. The evening air grew thick with tension as Alexander Perez and his gang of river pirates made their way upstream toward Globe. They'd caught wind of Mitchell's direction, and the promise of both stolen gold and ancient Indian mines had proven irresistible. Perez had built his reputation on violence, leading a crew that terrorized settlements along the waterways. The thought of Mitchell possessing such wealth filled him with a murderous rage. Helen Roberts watched the strangers arrive from behind the curtains of her boarding house. As the widow of Globe's former sheriff, she'd learned to read men's intentions in their bearing, in the way they carried their weapons. The tall man leading his horse to water moved like someone carrying a heavy burden, but not just in his saddlebags. She recognized Ethan Mitchell from the wanted posters, yet something in his manner spoke of a man seeking redemption rather than escape. Frances Turner, Benjamin's wife, argued fiercely with her husband in the back room of the trading post. She'd seen too many good men corrupted by greed, watched as the promise of easy riches turned neighbor against neighbor. The sacred map had already brought violence to their doorstep. 2 days ago, a group of masked men had ransacked their store, seeking information about Mitchell's whereabouts. The Comanche scout watched silently from the ridgeline as Mitchell approached the trading post. The chief had instructed them to observe, to ensure the map reached its intended destination. The gold mines were sacred ground, places of power that had to be protected from those who would desecrate them. The chief believed Mitchell's act of courage in saving his son revealed the true nature of his spirit, despite his outlaw past. Clara Perez rode hard toward Globe, desperate to warn her brother Alexander away from his destructive course. She alone knew the truth about the map, that it was meant to lead not to riches, but to a place of healing, a sacred site where those lost in darkness might find their way back to the light. The chief had chosen Mitchell precisely because he walked the line between two worlds, a man capable of understanding both the value and the burden of such knowledge. As night fell over the trading post, Ethan Mitchell made his decision. He would surrender the stolen gold, face the consequences of his past actions, but the map, that sacred trust, would not be betrayed. Noah Roberts, Helen's brother, and the newly appointed sheriff watched from the shadows as Mitchell unsaddled his horse. The law demanded justice for the robbery, but the territory's future might depend on showing mercy to a man willing to change. The old medicine man's words echoed in Mitchell's mind as he approached the trading post's door. The path to redemption is never straight, but it always leads home. In saving the chief's son from the bear, Mitchell had unknowingly begun a journey that would test not just his courage, but his very soul. The rivers that had long served as highways for outlaws might yet become roads to salvation, if he could find the strength to follow where they led. The trading post's interior was thick with pipe smoke and whispered conversations that died as Mitchell entered. Benjamin Turner, the post's proprietor, gave him a cautious nod from behind the rough-hewn counter. The old trader had seen enough of life along the river to know when trouble walked through his door, and tonight it arrived wearing trail dust and regret. Helen Roberts stepped from the back room, her dark hair catching the lamplight. She froze momentarily upon seeing Mitchell, then continued wiping glasses as if his presence meant nothing. But her hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm she tried to project. 3 years ago, before the robbery that made him an outlaw, they had planned a future together in Prescott. "Your brother's outside," Mitchell said quietly, approaching the counter. "I expect he'll be coming in shortly to arrest me." Helen's eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and something deeper, perhaps disappointment, perhaps lingering affection. Benjamin Turner quietly moved toward the door, presumably to alert the sheriff that his quarry had arrived. The night air carried the sound of horses approaching, more than just Noah's mount. Mitchell recognized the rhythm of cavalry horses, suggesting the army had joined the pursuit. The sacred map felt heavy in his vest pocket, a weight far beyond its physical presence. He thought of the Comanche chief's trust, of the bear's claws raking toward the young warrior, of choices made and paths taken. Frances Turner, Benjamin's wife, emerged from the kitchen with a pot of coffee. Without asking, she poured Mitchell a cup and set it before him. Her weathered face held neither judgment nor mercy, just the practical acceptance of a woman who had spent decades watching the river carry both good men and bad past her door. "Alexander Cole is leading the cavalry patrol," Helen said, breaking the tense silence. "He's not like Noah. He won't care about your reasons." Mitchell nodded, knowing the reputation of the ruthless army captain who had made a name for himself hunting deserters along the river between Flagstaff and Yuma. The map would be nothing but a trophy to such a man. Through the window, Mitchell watched Noah Roberts dismount, followed by 4 cavalry troopers. Alexander Cole sat astride his horse, straight-backed and imperious in the moonlight. The captain's reputation for brutality had grown since the war, and stories of his interrogation methods traveled up and down the river like dark legends. "There's a back door," Helen whispered, not looking at Mitchell. "Past the storeroom. Jacob's skiff is tied up at the landing." Mitchell studied her profile, remembering how they used to talk about building a ranch near Globe, raising horses and children far from the river's troubled waters. But that was before the gold fever took him, before greed burned away his better nature. The heavy tread of boots on the trading post's porch forced Mitchell's decision. He couldn't run, not this time, but he could choose how to face what was coming. His hand moved to the map in his vest, then to the stolen gold in his saddlebags. One represented a future of hope, the other a past of shame. The choice between them would shape not just his fate, but the lives of everyone in the room. Clara, the young Comanche woman who sometimes helped Frances in the kitchen, appeared silently at Mitchell's elbow. In her native tongue, she whispered, "The chief says a man's worth is measured not by the paths he has walked, but by the trails he chooses to break." Mitchell met her dark eyes, understanding that word of his decision here would reach the tribe, would either honor or shame the trust placed in him. The door began to open, lamplight catching the silver star on Noah Roberts' vest. Mitchell's hand moved away from both map and gold, choosing instead to wrap around the coffee cup Frances had given him. Sometimes, he realized, redemption meant simply standing still and facing what came. The river had taught him that. The same river that had carried him to this moment, this choice, this chance to become something more than his past. Noah Roberts stepped fully into the room, his weathered face illuminated by the flickering lamplight. Behind him, 2 deputies flanked the doorway, their hands resting casually on their holsters. The marshal's eyes swept the room, taking in the scattered maps and papers, before settling on Mitchell with the intensity of a hawk studying its prey. The silence stretched like a bowstring pulled taut. Frances moved deliberately between the tables, her skirts rustling against the rough wooden floor as she topped off coffee cups with practiced grace. The rich aroma of chicory filled the air, mixing with the lingering scent of wood smoke from the hearth. Clara had melted back into the shadows near the kitchen, but her presence remained, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. "Interesting company you're keeping these days, Mitchell," Noah remarked, his voice carrying the gravelly texture of too many trail-worn years. "Word from Globe says Alexander's gang hit another supply wagon. 3 men dead." He pulled out a chair, the legs scraping against the floorboards, and sat with the deliberate ease of a man who knew he controlled the situation. "Strange timing, you showing up here just now." Mitchell kept his grip steady on the coffee cup, though his knuckles whitened slightly. The river's constant murmur drifted through the open window, a reminder of paths taken and choices made. "I've been working Frances's trading post for 2 months now, Marshal. You know that." The statement hung in the air between them, a challenge wrapped in simple truth. Outside, the evening crowd at the riverside docks had grown quiet, as if the very air could sense the tension building within the trading post's walls. The summer heat beat down mercilessly as Ethan Mitchell stood at the bow of his riverboat, watching the muddy waters of the Colorado churn past the weathered hull. 5 years had passed since that fateful day when he'd saved the Comanche chief's son, and now here he was, guiding a vessel loaded with ill-gotten goods down the river toward Yuma. The sacred map, carefully hidden in his boot, seemed to burn against his ankle, a constant reminder of both his redemption's promise and his current sins. Benjamin Turner, his first mate and longtime partner in crime, appeared beside him with a worried expression that had become all too familiar lately. Cavalry patrol spotted upstream, he muttered, adjusting the worn pistol at his hip. They're checking every boat heading toward the territory border. Word is they're looking for those army supplies that went missing near Prescott last month. Both men knew exactly where those supplies were, stacked in their hold beneath carefully arranged crates of legitimate trading goods. The weight of his past pressed down on Ethan's shoulders as he remembered the earnest gratitude in the Comanche chief's eyes. That map was meant to be a gift of honor, not a tool for a river pirate's schemes. He'd tried convincing himself that one last score would give him the means to start fresh, but every time he unfolded that yellowed parchment, shame colored his intentions. The gold mines marked in faded ink promised wealth beyond measure. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that his redemption lay in how he used the map, not what he took from it. Frances Roberts stood on the dock at the approaching river bend, her sharp eyes scanning the water as she had every day since agreeing to help Ethan navigate the treacherous politics of the frontier trading routes. As the daughter of a legendary river pilot, she knew every sandbar and hidden channel between Flagstaff and Yuma. What she didn't know was that Ethan planned to betray their arrangement, using her expertise to slip past the authorities one final time before disappearing into the mountains with his stolen fortune. The situation grew more complex with each passing mile. Alexander Phillips, the cavalry officer leading the patrol, had his own secret connection to the map. Years ago, his grandfather had been part of the original expedition that discovered the mines, only to be driven away by the Comanche who claimed the land as sacred. Now, Alexander hunted river pirates while secretly searching for any clue that might lead him back to his family's lost legacy. The twisted strands of fate had drawn them all into an intricate dance along the Colorado's winding course. Clara Turner, Benjamin's sister and the owner of a legitimate trading post in Yuma, had unwittingly become entangled in their scheme. Her business provided the perfect cover for moving stolen goods, though she believed she was simply helping her brother establish honest trade routes with the river communities. Ethan's guilt over deceiving her cut deeper than he'd expected, especially as he'd watched her quiet determination to build something honorable in this harsh territory. The riverboat rounded a sharp bend, revealing a narrow channel flanked by towering red cliffs. Helen Perez's camp lay hidden in a narrow canyon just ahead, the last friendly port before the heavily patrolled stretches near Yuma. As a former outlaw herself, Helen had built a sanctuary for those seeking to leave their criminal past behind. She'd offered Ethan a chance at honest work months ago, but he'd been too focused on his grand scheme to accept. Now, with cavalry patrols closing in and his conscience weighing heavy, her offer echoed in his thoughts. Noah Roberts, Frances's younger brother and an aspiring lawman, had been watching Ethan's operation with growing suspicion. His sister's involvement troubled him deeply, and he'd begun gathering evidence of the river pirates' activities. Unknown to either sibling, Noah had already connected with Alexander Phillips, sharing intelligence about suspicious cargo movements along the Colorado. The noose was tightening, though not quite in the way anyone expected. The ancient Comanche warnings inscribed on the map spoke of more than just gold. They told of a sacred trust, of wealth meant to benefit all people of the river valleys. As Ethan studied those cryptic symbols by lamplight in his cabin, he finally began to understand. The true value of the map lay not in the gold itself, but in how it could unite the fractured communities along the Colorado. The revelation struck him like lightning. He had been given not just a map to riches, but a path to redemption for everyone touched by the river's troubled waters. Thunder rolled across the desert as storm clouds gathered over the canyon walls. Ethan knew he faced a choice that would affect far more lives than just his own. The stolen army supplies in his hold could arm a dozen settlements against raiders, or they could be sold for personal profit. The gold mines could enrich a few men, or they could provide sustainable income for both settlers and native tribes. As the first heavy drops of rain struck the deck, he realized that every person connected to this journey, Frances, Clara, Helen, Noah, Alexander, and even Benjamin, had been placed in his path for a reason. The storm intensified as Ethan guided his riverboat toward the narrow bend where the canyon walls pressed in close. Lightning illuminated the towering red cliffs, casting strange shadows across the ancient petroglyphs that marked the entrance to what the Comanche called the Valley of Spirits. The stolen army supplies shifted ominously in the hold below, while the sacred map seemed to burn in his breast pocket, demanding a decision that would reshape the territory's future. Through the sheets of rain, he spotted Benjamin's men positioned along both riverbanks, their rifles glinting in the storm's ethereal light. The notorious outlaw had somehow decoded the map's secret and now sought to claim both the gold and the military cache for himself. But Ethan saw something Benjamin couldn't. The intricate way the map's symbols mirrored the flow of water through the canyons, revealing not just mineral wealth but the key to sustainable irrigation for every community along the river's course. Frances stood at his side, her medical bag clutched tight, having refused to abandon ship when the confrontation became inevitable. Her presence reminded him of all the lives that hung in the balance: the sick children in Flagstaff she treated, the struggling farmers near Prescott who needed the water rights, and the displaced Comanche families who still held claim to their ancestral lands. The gold could fund the infrastructure needed to share the river's bounty fairly. "They're blocking the narrow passage ahead," Frances whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "But look at how the rain's affecting the canyon walls." Ethan nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her observation. The deluge was loosening centuries of sediment, creating a natural defense against Benjamin's ambush. Nature itself seemed to be choosing sides in this final confrontation. Helen's warning from Yuma echoed in his mind. The territorial governor had dispatched troops to intercept Benjamin's gang, but they wouldn't arrive in time. Alexander and Noah were supposedly leading a group of settlers and Comanche allies downstream from Globe, but the storm might delay them too. Ethan realized he would have to make his stand here, using the river's power and the map's knowledge to forge a different path. The boat's wooden hull groaned as Ethan steered toward a series of rapids he'd always avoided before. The map showed a hidden channel, one that would require precise timing with the storm surge to navigate. Benjamin's men wouldn't dare follow through such treacherous waters. Clara had taught him how to read the river's moods during their trading days, and now those lessons would determine not just his survival, but the future of every settlement along the Colorado. Rain-slicked ropes burned through his palms as he adjusted the rigging. Frances braced herself against the wheelhouse, understanding without words that they were committing to a course from which there could be no return. The first shots rang out from the canyon rim, bullets spitting water around the boat's hull. But Ethan had already initiated their descent into the rapids, using the storm's fury to mask their true trajectory. The hidden channel revealed itself exactly as the map had indicated: a narrow slash through the canyon wall that would be invisible in calmer weather. As they slipped into the passage, Ethan caught a glimpse of Benjamin's furious face on the cliff above, illuminated by another flash of lightning. The outlaw leader finally understood that his quest for personal wealth had been outmaneuvered by a larger vision for the territory's future. Water roared through the secret gorge, carrying them toward a valley that had been lost to colonial memory but preserved in Comanche wisdom. Here, according to the map's cryptic markings, lay not just gold mines but the remnants of an ancient irrigation system that could be restored. The storm's power drove them forward, away from the echoing gunfire and toward the possibility of redemption, not just for Ethan, but for all those who called the river's banks home. As the boat emerged into a hidden canyon at dawn, the storm clearing to reveal a sun-painted landscape, Ethan saw the truth of his journey written in the rock walls around them. The gold had never been meant for a single person's wealth. It was meant to fund a dream of cooperation that could heal the territory's bitter divisions. Frances squeezed his shoulder, both of them understanding that their real work was just beginning. The map had led them not to an ending, but to a new beginning for the entire river valley. The sun hung low over the trading post at Prescott as Ethan Mitchell watched the last remnants of his old gang disappear into custody. Sheriff Alexander Turner's deputies led them away in chains while curious townsfolk gathered to witness the spectacle. Ethan's testimony had finally brought down the notorious Phillips gang, though the price of redemption weighed heavily on his conscience. The sacred Comanche map felt like both a blessing and a curse in his weathered hands. Benjamin Roberts, the aging trader who had given Ethan shelter these past months, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing, son. Those men would have torn this territory apart looking for that gold. Sometimes mercy means facing hard truths." The old man's words carried the weight of wisdom earned through decades along the frontier. Frances Turner, the sheriff's daughter, approached with determined steps that kicked up small clouds of dust. Her presence still made Ethan's heart skip, though he knew a former outlaw could never be worthy of a woman like her. "Father says the territorial governor is considering a full pardon for your help bringing them to justice. You could start fresh, make an honest life here." The trading post had become more than just a refuge for Ethan. In the months since saving the chief's son, he had found purpose helping Benjamin manage the river commerce, protecting honest merchants from the very type of men he used to ride with. The respect he'd earned felt more valuable than any gold mine. Clara Phillips, wife of the gang's imprisoned leader, watched from the shadows of the livery stable with eyes that promised vengeance. Her husband Noah's capture had left her with nothing but bitter hatred. Ethan knew she blamed him for destroying everything she had, but he couldn't regret choosing conscience over loyalty to criminals. As twilight painted the canyon walls in deep purple hues, Helen Perez rode in from the Comanche territories with urgent news. The chief's son had taken ill, and the tribe believed only Ethan's presence could lift the spiritual affliction. The sacred map had come with obligations that went beyond mere treasure hunting. The decision weighed heavily as Ethan studied the intricate markings on the hide map. The gold mines could bring prosperity to Prescott's struggling traders, but revealing their location might also draw more outlaws seeking easy riches. The chief had trusted him with both his son's life and his people's secret wealth. Francis found him later that evening by the river, where gentle waters reflected the first emerging stars. "You're not really considering going back out there alone, are you?" Her concern touched something deep in his reformed soul. "Those mines belong to the Comanche. I was given this map as a sacred trust, not a treasure map." Benjamin's trading post buzzed with activity as riverboats brought news of more gangs gathering in Yuma, drawn by rumors of the map's existence. Ethan knew his past would keep haunting Prescott until he found a way to honor both his debt to the Comanche and his commitment to his new home. Alice Roberts, Benjamin's daughter, had been quietly observing Ethan's transformation from outlaw to protector. She understood better than most how a person could change when given the chance. "Sometimes the greatest courage is choosing not to fight, even when others expect violence," she told him one evening. The solution came to Ethan during a long night of contemplation. He would return the map to the chief, but first ensure Prescott's trading routes were secure enough to sustain the community without relying on gold. His redemption wouldn't be complete until he had built something lasting. Sheriff Turner gathered the town council to hear Ethan's proposal for establishing a cooperative trading alliance with the Comanche. It would mean sharing the river's bounty rather than exploiting the mines, but it offered a future built on trust rather than greed. As dawn broke over the canyon, Ethan prepared for his journey back to the Comanche lands. Frances stood beside him, her father's blessing evident in the badge she now wore as deputy. "I'll keep the peace here," she promised. "You do what needs to be done." Their fingers intertwined briefly, a tender gesture of possibilities to come. The trading post's bell rang out across Prescott as Ethan rode east with Helen as his guide. Behind him, Benjamin and Alice continued the work of building bridges between cultures. Clara Phillips had disappeared in the night, taking her bitterness elsewhere. The future remained uncertain, but Ethan had finally found his true path. Jacob Turner, the sheriff's younger brother and Prescott's banker, pledged to support the new trading initiative. The town would prosper not through hidden gold, but through the honest commerce that had always been its lifeblood. Ethan's redemption had shown them all a better way forward. The story of the map and the bear attack became legend along the river trading routes, but few knew the full truth. Ethan's greatest treasure wasn't gold or pardons, but the trust he'd earned from both settlers and Comanche. In choosing honor over greed, he had found something far more precious than any mine could yield. As the sun set on another day in Prescott, the trading post stood as a symbol of cooperation rather than conflict. Ethan's transformation from outlaw to peacemaker had changed not just his own destiny, but the future of the frontier itself. The sacred map had led him not to gold, but to redemption. Years passed, and Prescott flourished under the new trade agreements that Ethan had helped forge. The trading post expanded into a bustling marketplace where Comanche and settlers exchanged goods freely, their children playing together in the dusty streets while their parents conducted business. The old tensions gradually dissolved like morning mist over the river, replaced by a cautious but growing trust. One crisp autumn morning, Benjamin's son Noah arrived at Ethan's cabin with news from the Comanche camps. The chief's son, now a respected leader himself, had named his firstborn after the man who had saved him from the bear. It was a profound honor that brought tears to Ethan's weathered eyes, a reminder of how far he'd come from his outlaw days. Jacob Turner had expanded his banking operations to include loans for joint ventures between settlers and tribal traders. His brother, the sheriff, had initially been skeptical, but now proudly pointed to their town as an example for others to follow. Flagstaff and Globe had sent representatives to study their success, hoping to replicate the peaceful commerce that defined the new Prescott. Helen, who had stood by Ethan through his transformation, now ran a school where both settler and Comanche children learned each other's languages and customs. The sacred map, carefully preserved but never used for its original purpose, hung on the schoolhouse wall as a reminder of the choice that had changed everything. She often told the story to wide-eyed students, teaching them that true wealth came from understanding and respect. The river that had once divided two peoples now united them. Trading canoes and flatboats moved freely up and down its length, carrying not just goods but ideas and friendship. Clara, a young Comanche woman, had married Alexander, one of Jacob's clerks, their union symbolizing the new bonds between the communities. Their wedding celebration lasted 3 days, combining traditions from both cultures. Frances, the old medicine woman who had first translated the map's markings, still visited Ethan regularly. She would sit by his fire, sharing stories of the changes she'd witnessed in her long life. "The gold in that map was never meant to be dug from the earth," she would say, her wise eyes twinkling. "It was meant to be found in the hearts of those who could see beyond their own desires." The outlaws who had once pursued Ethan, hoping to steal the map's secrets, had long since moved on or reformed themselves. Some, inspired by his example, had settled in nearby communities, becoming honest traders or farmers. The legend of the map had transformed from a tale of hidden riches to one of spiritual wealth and redemption. Anna, who had helped tend Ethan's wounds after his encounter with the bear, now ran a healing house that combined Western medicine with traditional Comanche remedies. Patients came from as far as Yuma seeking treatment, finding not just physical healing, but a deeper understanding of both cultures. Her work embodied the bridge building that had become Prescott's hallmark. As Ethan grew older, he often sat on his porch overlooking the river, watching the steady flow of commerce and community that had replaced the old cycles of violence and mistrust. The scars from the bear attack had faded, but the lessons remained sharp and clear. He had learned that the greatest treasures weren't found in secret mines, but in the connections between people who chose to see past their differences. The trading post he'd helped establish had grown into a symbol of possibility, proving that the frontier's future lay not in conflict, but in cooperation. Young traders, both settler and Comanche, sought his advice and blessing before starting their ventures. They called him the bridge builder, though he always insisted that the real bridge had been built by countless small acts of trust and courage from people on both sides. Alice, a young girl from Globe who had heard the stories, once asked Ethan if he regretted not finding the gold. He smiled and pointed to the thriving community around them, to the children playing together regardless of their heritage, to the peaceful commerce that sustained them all. "The map led me to something far more precious," he told her. "It led me home."